Hi there, sixth graders. This is World History, Chapter 13, Lesson 3, East, Central, and Southern Africa. I will be reading starting on page 380. But first, the preview in the yellow bar. Trading empires developed in Eastern, Central, and Southern Africa that interacted with Arabia, India, and China. First are a list of names and places. Axum, Ethiopia, Adefa, Sofala, Kilwa, Great Zimbabwe, Benin, Ezana, Lalibela, Swahili, Oba, Zagwe Dynasty, Salamanid Dynasty. You are there. This is the first time your father has taken you on one of his many travels. Your father is a merchant trader. He travels between Sofala and the state of Great Zimbabwe to trade gold and ivory for trade goods such as ceramics from India and China. You want to see for yourself the amazing place that he has been describing to you. When you arrive, you see the stone enclosures that rise more than 30 feet in the air. As you take a closer look, you realize that nothing is holding the stones together. They have been cut to fit tightly together, like a giant jigsaw puzzle. You hear shouts. People are telling you and others in the crowd that you must leave the area because the king is coming. You've heard from your father that the king is a mysterious and powerful person. Most people never even get to see him. Your father tells you that the gold and ivory have been loaded and it's time to go. Even after walking several miles, you are still able to look back and see the stone enclosures. First, we travel to East Africa. What were these great stone enclosures or walls? They were constructed by people who began to live in Eastern Africa around AD 300. These people interacted with people living in the trading city-states that arose along the eastern coast of Africa. In about 350, the iron-rich trade center of Meroe, which we read about back in Unit 2, was invaded by forces from the kingdom of Axum in the Ethiopian highlands. Axum had began, as a trading settlement in the 6th century BC. Over time, it had grown into a powerful empire. Axum exported ivory, frankincense, and myrrh to Greece and Rome. Both myrrh and frankincense were made from the resin of trees that grew in the mountainous areas of Axum. Do you suppose that's where those three kings came from? Craft workers also created luxury goods from brass, copper, and crystal. In exchange for these trade goods, Axum received cloth, jewelry, metals, and steel, which is used to make weapons. Axum traders bartered as a means for the exchange of trade goods. Christian kingdoms existed in northeastern Africa since about 330, when the king of Axum, Ezana, converted to Christianity. To the northwest of Axum were the Christian kingdoms of Noba and Makura, located between the first and fifth cataracts of the Nile River. Remember, the cataracts were the waterfalls. The people in these kingdoms converted to Christianity between 500 and 650. After Arabs invaded Egypt in the 7th century, the kingdoms continued to exist. Arab invasions did not destroy Axum, but changing climatic conditions and trade routes that moved away from the Red Sea forced people to abandon Axum, and as a result, many people moved inland. Quite a picture there. The caption: the kings of Axum commemorated their glories with stone stelae, or ceremonial stone slabs, sometimes up to 100 feet high, which were built above underground royal tombs. These stone towers could have also been built as symbols of power. Ethiopia. Ethiopia replaced the Aksum civilization. Around 1150, a new dynasty, the Zagwe dynasty, took the thrones from the old line of Aksumite kings. Christianity became firmly established in Ethiopia under the Zagwe. The capital was moved to Adefa on the central highlands. A Zagwe king, Lalibela, ruled from about 1185 to 1225. During his rule, he had 11 churches built out of solid rock at the new capital. He built these churches to show his faith and to gain respect for his leadership. The largest church, called the Savior of the World, is more than 100 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 35 feet high. Now you can see the picture there at the bottom of the page. That is one of those stone churches. Now, they were not built underground. This has been excavated. And you can just see how large it is compared to the people there as well. In 1790, the Zagwe dynasty was taken over by the Salamanid dynasty. The Salamanid rulers claimed to be descendants of the original rulers of ancient Aksum. Their rule of Ethiopia would last until 1974. The Salamanids stopped building great stone churches and palaces in Ethiopia. The Salamanid kings and their royal courts, which included government and military officials, instead began to live in more modest structures. One result of this was that there was no longer a permanent capital. The king and his court moved as often as 2 or 3 times a year. This was how the king would stay in close contact with all the regions in the kingdom. As a result, people of the kingdom were more loyal to their king. However, the king's court included so many people that every time they moved into a region, they would use up all of its food and fuel supplies. Kilwa. As Islam spread in the 7th and 8th centuries, cities along the eastern coast of Africa became more involved in Indian Ocean trade. At first, this trade involved northern cities. By the 9th century, more southern cities, such as Sofala and Kilwa, were involved in the gold and ivory trade. In 1331, Ibn Battuta, remember when we read about him, visited Kilwa and described its elegance. One Arab trader remarked of Kilwa that their mosques are very strongly constructed of wood. It is one of the most beautiful and well-constructed towns in the world. The Indian Ocean trade network extended from East Africa to India and China, as well as to Arabia. Arabs settled in East African coastal cities, such as Mombasa. Muslim and East African culture mixed, creating a Swahili culture and language. Swahili is the Arabic word for people of the coast. Both Arabic and Swahili were used as trading languages to help more traders communicate. The Portuguese began to attack Kilwa and Mombasa in the early 1500s. They wanted control of Indian Ocean trade. The attacks were successful, but Swahili groups again gained control of many ports along the coast. And the map at the top of the page, this shows the trade routes, especially the Indian Ocean trade routes here. And you can see some of the land routes, but more importantly, the sea routes. Great Zimbabwe. The stone enclosures of Great Zimbabwe were built by the Shona people between 1200 and 1450. Zimbabwe means houses of stone in the Shona language. The enclosures were not built for defense, but to show the power and importance of the king. Like Kilwa, the city of Great Zimbabwe reached its height around 1400. Great Zimbabwe participated in the gold and ivory trade that eventually made its way to Kilwa. Gold was not exactly mined in the region, but taxing the trade goods provided a major source of wealth for Great Zimbabwe. By the early 15th century, there were about 11,000 people living in and around Great Zimbabwe. Then, in about 1450, people abandoned Great Zimbabwe. The large population had exhausted resources, such as trees for timber, soil for growing crops, and grasses for grazing farm animals. The Portuguese invaded the area about 100 years later and finally conquered the kingdom in the late 1600s. I just think this drawing here at the bottom of the page is fascinating. This is a depiction of Great Zimbabwe, one of the largest, wealthiest, and most sophisticated of the ancient sub-Saharan cultures. So there's this V-shaped pattern decorating the outside of the wall. It's this bean-shaped enclosure. When you learn about cells in science class, this to me looks like a cell. The wall itself, if you read the caption, the outside wall was 16 feet thick at the base and 32 feet tall. This is a very, very thick fortified wall. There's nothing getting through this. And they're so wide, you can see there are guards on lookout walking along that top edge. I just think this is great. Benin. Near the delta of the Niger River was the forest kingdom of Benin. The kings in Benin were called Obas. They took power about 1300. In the late 1400s, the Portuguese began to trade coral beads and cloth for ivory, animal skins, and pepper with Benin. By 1500, Benin grew to become a powerful empire. By then, Benin was trading its ivory, cloth, spices, and slaves. This forest region had fertile soil and received lots of rain. People grew crops such as yams and cotton. They lived in Benin City, the capital city, as well as in the country. Houses were made of mud. However, the Oba's palace, remember that's the king, the Oba's palace had doors made of metal and had beautiful designs and pictures. In addition to trade, Benin was known for its great art. Many artists used bronze, ivory, and wood to make sculptures and carvings. Craftspeople made beautiful bronze and brass sculptures to decorate the Oba's palace. This was how the artists showed the greatness of the Oba. To protect these riches, high wooden walls were built around the Oba's palace. So we read about some of these great East, Central, and Southern African kingdoms. Thanks for listening.